AMD's CES 2022 event has just concluded, and we've compiled all of the pertinent details for you in one convenient location. Here's a rundown of the announcements, as well as our reactions to them. Let's start with AMD's desktop announcements, with the Ryzen 7 5800X3D, AMD's first Zen CPU to feature Vcache 3D stacking technology, being the big one for CPU enthusiasts. AMD's new top gaming CPU is the Ryzen 7 5800X3D. Vcache was shown off at Computex 2021, and it works by layering a cache die on top of a 7nm Zen 3 chiplet to greatly improve L3 cache. You can see the area in the middle of this rendered image of the 5800X3D where this extra silicon is stacked on top of the existing CPU, with the CPU cores at the edges. The 5800X3D goes from 32 MB of L3 cache to 96 MB with Vcache, which includes the original 32 MB on the Zen 3 chiplet plus 64 MB of Vcache. The rest of the CPU is virtually the same as the 5800X. It's an 8-core, 16-thread design that runs on AM4 motherboards in the 400 and 500 series, and it has a 105W TDP. The base frequency has been reduced from 3.8 to 3.4 GHz, and the boost frequency has been reduced from 4.7 to 4.5 GHz, compared to the normal 5800X. I believe this is due to a combination of the necessity to keep the extra cache within the same power envelope, and the Vcache component's clocking speed is limited. At this time, AMD has just stated that the 5800X3D will be available in the spring, with no pricing information. It will also be the only consumer Vcache chip available at that time. We asked AMD if it will be coming to other CPUs, but they stated this is the only one for the time being. That makes sense because gaming performance is the primary benefit of Vcache in a consumer CPU. Our own testing has shown that increasing cache capacity can significantly improve gaming performance, and AMD is claiming the same thing, with a 15% average performance boost over the Ryzen 9 5900X and slightly higher performance than Intel's Core i9-12900K, good enough for AMD to claim the title of fastest gaming processor. We'll have to verify whether any of this is real and how much cherry-picking is going on because these are merely first-party benchmarks. The 5900X and 5950X don't make much sense for gamers right now, as their performance isn't much better than the 5800X for gaming workloads. The first Vcache part being released as a boosted 5800X is definitely the sweet spot for a premium gaming CPU. Radeon RX 6500 XT, a new budget Radeon. Moving on to desktop graphics, AMD launched the Radeon RX 6500 XT as a new mainstream choice for gamers. Assuming you can find one, which is not often the case these days. This little GPU has 16 compute units, 16 MB of infinite cache, and a gaming clock of 2.6 GHz, making it roughly half the size of a Radeon RX 6600 XT. AMD hasn't revealed the memory subsystem specifications, which are likely to be limited to 4 GB of GDDR6 on a 64-bit bus. The Radeon RX 570 and the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1650 are AMD's benchmarks for the 6500 XT. According to AMD, performance should be 30 to 40% better than the GTX 1650, with a smaller difference between the RX 570 and the GTX 1650 at 1080p. These figures position it between an RX 580 and a GTX 1650 Super. So, in the coming weeks, we'll see how that goes. The 6500 XT will be available on January 19 for $200 MSRP, which is quite likely to be a false MSRP based on previous GPU release trends. If the pricing remains the same after the first round of cards, we'll be very shocked. According to AMD, supply will be a concern, but should be comparable to the 6600 series, which had adequate supplies. Real price is the main question mark here, and there are a couple of benchmarks we can look at. The RX 6600 and RX 6600 XT are currently languishing at 75% inflation above the MSRP on the scalper market. The RX 6600 is around $580 compared to its $330 MSRP. Then there are AMD's comparison points. The GTX 1650 is $270 used, up from $150 at launch, and the RX 574GB is $230 used, up from $170, with the RX 574GB being faster. With its projected 4GB of VRAM and restricted memory bandwidth, it's also unlikely to appeal to miners. In today's market, I believe the card will sell for around $300. All things considered, the MSRP is likewise unimpressive, and it has definitely been pushed up due to tremendous GPU demand. This card's performance will most likely be comparable to the RX 580, which was released in early 2017 for $200 in its 4GB configuration. Even without factoring in AIBs, distributors, and scalpers increasing the price in the real GPU market, it appears that there is still very little progress in price to performance in the mainstream nearly 5 years later. Given the plethora of GTX 1060s and RX 580s in systems today, it's questionable whether something like this would appeal to the typical mainstream buyer who already owns a GPU with this level of performance. With only 16 compute units, the 6500 XT appears more like a replacement for the RX 560, which was a $100 GPU in 2017. Old cards can be obtained for around $150 today. If the MSRP is still too high, a $150 MSRP might be acceptable. However, GPUs are now selling for far more than they should be, and if the real price ends up being $250 or less, it will almost certainly be a better deal than what you can get right now.